Hello and welcome to the Agros Church podcast. I'm lead pastor Dane Johansson. I'm here with Reverend Taylor DeSoto. Once again, we're going to talk about some updates, some topics, some new projects that Taylor's working on. We were talking about a few months ago doing kind of a Q&A follow-up on a bunch of different stuff that Taylor was working on, so I figured why not now in the middle of this everyone stay home and don't leave and be scared moment. So I figured that would be good. So we have, I think, 5 questions that we were going to ask. So how is things with you? First question.
Good. Thanks for asking. Thanks for having me on your show, man.
Oh yeah.
Really appreciate being back in the podcast game. I'm excited to be here. So things have been good with me. Obviously, everyone's kind of cooped up right now. So I started writing a little tiny bit. But that's kind of what I'm doing right now.
That's awesome. All right, cool. Well, let's just get into it. So first question that I'd like to hear you respond to is, so why are we still talking about all this tech stuff? You know, we had the Text and Canon conference with True Love and Dr. Riddle. Wasn't that it? Why are we still going on about this stuff? What else is left to say? So why does the text and translation discussion still matter? Why are we still going on about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I think, first of all, the Text and Canon conference failed. We didn't convert the whole world to the TR. Right. No, there's a couple of things going on right now that warrant the discussion, I think, becoming louder.
Yeah.
The first is that you have an influx of new translations that are coming onto the market now. You have, for example, MacArthur's translation, and I think that Pastor Riddle really spoke kind of prophetically to that almost a year ago or maybe more, where he said there's going to be a time where every publishing house has their own translation, has their own text, and that's going to go perhaps into denominations. You have Bethel has their own little translation. And so that's the first reason. I think we're not going to see that slowing down. I don't think they're pumping the brakes on that. So as long as there's money to be had in translation and printing new Bibles, I think this conversation is going to become louder, especially as those translations become more liberal.
Yeah.
In the translation methodology and in the ways that they're translating words that might not necessarily be politically liberal, but theologically liberal. And then you have, on the other hand, the discussion of text criticism, which is becoming more and more prevalent, I think probably due to the way that seminaries teach New Testament now.
Yeah.
New Testament exegesis is a lot of decoding. It's a lot of really getting into what each word means as opposed to looking at a whole sentence. And I'm not saying that they don't do that, but from what I've seen, there's a heavy emphasis on diagramming and there's heavy emphasis on word studies. And I think as you start to add text criticism into exegesis, this is going to trickle down more and more as, this becomes more mainstream in seminaries. It's going to trickle down to the people, and we're already seeing this now. The people are being encouraged to dabble in Greek and Hebrew, to learn how to use Bible Word Hub or Blue Letter Bible or whatever your online lexicon is. And so this isn't slowing down, both text critical and translation. So I think that this discussion needs to be had, and people need to be aware if they do become disenchanted with that direction of things. Someone's going to eventually start to say, hey, I'm not sure if I like the way this is going. I don't want to learn Greek. I don't want to learn Hebrew. I don't want to do a word study. Why didn't my dad have to learn how to do word studies to read his Bible? What's going on? And so I think that's a good reason this conversation needs to continue being pushed forward.
Well, and as you mentioned earlier, it seems almost more and more sectarian, as you mentioned, with the every denomination is going to have, and we're already seeing that, like you said, the Passion Translation with the New Apostolic Reformation, they have their thing. It's almost completely the Old Testament, I think. You already have the Christian Standard Bible, which is the HCSB revamped for the Southern Baptists. You have the ESV really appeals to the young, restless, and reformed. And, the NSB kind of was the old folks' Bible, the old Reformed guys' Bible. And now you have the Legacy Bible, MacArthur, as you mentioned, coming out. So there's going to be and then the NSB 2020, who knows who that'll appeal to. So it's going to be even more sectarian, more divided up. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's important that we talk about this still. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that right now we're seeing so much division, especially among solid churches,
mm,
right? Uh, and a lot of that has to do with, I mean, right now everyone wants to talk about the social justice stuff. Everyone wants to talk about liberalism and Christianity, but liberalism has been in the Orthodox camp forever. I
right,
mean, obviously they don't stay Orthodox for long. That's obvious, but you know, at some point you're going to have to say, okay, what is something that can unify all of these Orthodox denominations?
mm,
What common language can we have among each other? And I think that if you get on the same Bible, then you solve a lot of those issues. You can rally behind something, have the same theological grammar. You're exegeting the same words, and
mm,
so any theological differences are handled on the same playing field. Right now, we have the new Calvinists exegeting a basketball field, and the you know the Presbyterians exegeting a baseball field.
right,
You know, they're playing on different fields.
hmm,
You know, you have different texts,
yeah,
and how can you be unified if you're not even exegeting the same text as one another?
right.
You know, where's the common ground? And I think that if there were to be unity in translation and an underlying text, that there could be a great revival
Mm.
within Orthodox Christian and conservative Christian camps.
No, amen. I agree. Especially after 2020, everyone was, oh, 2020 is going to be so great. Everyone had a really optimistic view of 2020, and then it took a big dump like right away. So, especially in this time, what do you think about that? With everyone's quarantined, there's all this fear,
Mhm.
there's all this,
Right.
people freaking out. I'm sure the dispensationalists are having a field day, but how do you think that plays into, and why is this important in the midst of people now coming out of this virus, this quarantine, all this kind of
Mhm.
stuff? How does that play into it, do you think? Why do you think it's even more important?
Well, maybe not so much on the text issue, but I see this as really having exposed people's covenant theology in a pretty big way.
Yeah.
You know, on one hand, you point to the flood, for example, and after, and the regulation of seasons and
Mm,
God's providence and
mm,
His purpose for His covenant people, and there seems to be a bit of memory loss
mm,
in conservative Christian camps that's saying, you know, yeah, we believe that God is providential, but we also are not going to recognize that this is punishment
mm,
on the church for being unfaithful. You
yeah.
know, think about the Old Testament. You look at if your covenant theology is consistent, you're going to look at the Old Testament and see, okay, when Israel was unfaithful, God took their worship away from them.
Yeah.
He allowed thorns to grow on their altars,
Mm,
and He took them out of the land.
yeah.
You know, and I'm not necessarily seeing this as related to the text issue. Maybe you can draw something out for me after I'm done here,
Yeah.
but I see it as really catching people out on their covenant
Mm,
theology, thinking that this has nothing to do with a disobedient church,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You know, regardless of what you think, is this pestilence actually a pestilence? Is it deadly? Is it not deadly? Put that on the side for a second and say, look at how God is judging the nation, regardless of how bad the pestilence is.
Right.
He has shut down Lord's Day worship for the most part.
Yeah.
He has isolated people. He's
Mm,
prohibited fellowship essentially,
yeah.
and he's taken away the church's right to worship together.
Right.
And you see that in the scriptures when God
Mm,
is chastising His people.
yeah. Amen. No, definitely. And I think you would agree with this statement. I think that's why it's even more important people have confidence in their Bible now, coming out
Right?
not only
Yeah.
so they understand what they are to do in obedience to God, but also
Mhm.
people that are afraid, genuinely afraid. Where are they going to turn? A Bible that changes every
Right.
couple of years, a new translation
Right.
that comes out every 2 years. No, they need to have a stable text. I think you would agree with that. So,
Well, yeah, and that's actually you just jarred my memory on something. Right now, we're also seeing kind of the fruit of continuationism.
mm-hmm,
You know, you're seeing a lot of people turning to extra biblical prophecy. You're
mm-hmm,
seeing people turning. I mean, funnily enough, you're seeing the NAR and the charismatics kind of really getting caught out.
right,
You know, they're shutting down their faith healing clinics. They close their doors too, and I think that that's a really powerful testimony to
mm,
the way that God is speaking today, because the second that you have any sort of major pandemic or pestilence, they shut their doors. They're like, yeah, no. And so when God shuts the door to your imagination and your, supposed private revelation, where are you going to turn? What's the consistent standard? What's not going to change? I kind of have this speculation that a big reason that people are so okay with their Bible changing every couple of years is because they have that to fall back onto. Like, no, the final say of my faith is what Jesus Christ personally says to me in my prayer life and in my dreams and through words of encouragement, words of knowledge. What happens when God takes that away from you?
Right.
And I've seen people fall away from the faith so quick the second that their feelings don't line up with what they believe about revelation, private revelation and things like this. So it's absolutely relevant. And we're seeing the continuationist doctrine really caught out right now. And where are they going to turn if your text is changing?
Yeah.
I think that's a large reason people have at least partially a reason why people have kind of thought that it's okay to abandon the historical Protestant doctrine of preservation and inspiration.
Right. And you and I have talked extensively about this, and anyone who watches this podcast knows that that our primary reason for all the work we've done, and this is again all side work from pastoral ministry, but this is all side stuff, is pastoral. Is not only to be faithful to God and the orthodox doctrines of Scripture, but also it's pastoral. That people have a place to turn, as you just said, that people have a foundation, that the average plowboy, the person in the pew, Joe Plumber, can trust his Bible and teach his family from the Bible. And so if that's our main thrust, always has been, is that the person can trust their Bible without having to worry about what Greek text, or do I need to go back to the Greek? Do I need to go back to the Hebrew? I need to wait for the scholars to tell me not only what the text is, but what it means. So now we just have the papacy, except almost worse. If that's our goal, and we're the ones that have been pushing this and saying that people should have a Bible and trust in it, then that brings us to our second question. Why do you think, Taylor, that there's such a pushback from quote-unquote evangelical text scholars? We think of guys that, we've even sat down and had conversations with, like Dr. Peter Gurry. The list goes on. Why is there such a pushback from evangelical scholars? If our position's irrelevant, it's wrong, and our position is just trying to give people confidence in the Bible anyway.
Well, in the first place, I think that a lot of people had this idea that text criticism was going to be this powerful evangelical tool.
Yeah.
They thought that it was going to be this great apologetic that would convince all of these other people, the atheist, the Muslim, the Mormon, or whoever you want to talk to. And I don't think that's yielded the fruit that they necessarily thought it would. And when we see these videos of Muslims, playing all these videos of James White, for example, and Dan Wallace going and making a fool of himself with Bart Ehrman and all these things, the reason we're getting so much pushback is because I think they've realized they've exported all their resources to the wrong people. They've spent their efforts debating the Muslim. They've spent their efforts debating the atheist and the skeptic and this guy and that guy and the higher critic and the neo-Orthodox. They've exported the efforts of their ministry outside the church, and because it's not the gospel, it's yielded no fruit. And so then they turn around and look back at the church and they realize, whoa, what happened? We just turned around. We went out and we were fighting for you guys. And what I think they're realizing is that textual criticism, evangelical textual criticism, doesn't serve the church.
Right.
You go back, you go into the pew and you go into churches and you see that evangelical text criticism hasn't benefited the body.
Right.
It's propped up as this major evangelical tool, this big apologetic tool, but then you go to the average church and they don't care. It doesn't benefit the average person. And so they see a movement like the TR movement, the ecclesiastical text, whatever you want to call it, and they say, how are these people, getting so many people interested? What's actually going on here?
Right.
It's because we are offering something that requires faith. We're saying God preserved his word. This is something that is given to you by God. You hear your shepherd's voice because you have the Holy Spirit. And people are actually getting confidence in their Bible. They actually believe that the words they're reading are powerful, and God's speaking to them. And it's not just, a translation of a translation of a translation of a this and a that. No, this is God speaking to you. And when your pastor preaches from the word of God, God is speaking. So you need to listen.
Right.
And people are actually being encouraged by that. They're being built up in their faith. And the reason we get so much pushback is because that's not okay. The academy has spent the last, however many decades pouring a lot of energy into this. They've literally changed the Bible.
Yeah.
And now they're realizing they can't produce an original, and they're finding that a lot of Christians are finding that out. And a lot of Christians don't like the stuff Dan Wallace says. A lot of Christians don't like this idea of quasi-preservation. And when they actually put their ideas out there, I think they're finding that people aren't necessarily okay with it.
Right. No, I agree. So when we have somebody like you and I, who are, we don't have a PhD from Cambridge in text criticism. We don't have all the accolades, and we don't have to do the scholarly handshakes and all that kind of stuff to get in the club, right? So, I mean, even just recently from the Word magazine that Jeff Riddle and I did the other day, that was told to him by these guys. You don't have the right accolades. Even you, Dr. Riddle, you don't have a right to speak because you don't have the proper, degrees, and you're not in the field and you're not publishing. So to kind of tie up everything you just said, you think that it's the reason why there's still so much pushback towards people who apparently have no right to speak and are completely uneducated on the issues anyway, is because they've realized they've spent their capital. The capital is gone. Yeah. They've put it out there and realized that they can't come up with they can't put out what they actually said they would, which is confidence in the text. And it's come back bankrupt. And so now we're coming along, people like us, and saying, hey, you can have confidence in this age-old text. Everyone's used it. It's tried and true. And that's the word of God. Look at the providence of God. Have faith in the providence of God. Have faith in the Reformed doctrines that teach us about the providence, about the inspiration of Scripture, the self-authentication of the Scripture, the work of the Holy Spirit. And then you're good to go, and you can move on and you can share the gospel with people rather than talking about text criticism with people. So they realize they're bankrupt on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what I have found is there's a lot of projection coming from their side. They'll say, they'll say something like, "Where's your text? Which TR?" And it's like we say, "Here it is," and I think that's really a representation of how they feel. And they talk about oftentimes how the KJV is the new Vulgate, and we need to, Mark Ward seems to think that he's a new Martin Luther, and he's got to free people from the captivity of the KJV. But what are you freeing people from? You're freeing them into a literal new, the actual new Vulgate. Yeah. Which is essentially, listen, you don't have the scholarly credentials. You can't do the handshake. You're not in the guild. Right. You're not in the club. Right. And you need to sit down, shut up, and wait for us to tell you what to think. How is that not the same thing that was going on in 16th century? We get to read the Bible for you. And we're just going to go ahead and tell you what to read and how to read it.
And what you're allowed to read. What is the text?
Yeah, right. Exactly. And so it's just a case of projection from my perspective. Any time that they launch an attack at the TR, look at that argument and see, can you apply it to their side? And is it more true for their side? Right. They go after our scholars, right? They go after Beza and Erasmus and Stephanus. They go after, and the KJV translators. What happens if we turn that around and look at their scholars? Right. Who's worse, Beza or DC Parker? Right? Right. you look at these arguments, and it's just a classic case of projection. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people are missing. They see, wow, that's such a powerful argument for the TR or against the TR. And you say, okay, well, first of all, attacking an authority is really not that powerful, shouldn't be all that powerful to you. Right. But if you want to compare authorities, let's just line them up next to each other. Dirk Youngkind versus Stephanus. Who do you want representing your side? Right. And I mean, I think that this is just like we're seeing with I hate to bring up politics, but the mainstream media, people are seeing that their reporting is not good.
Right.
In the same way, people are starting to say, hey, maybe this isn't all that it's caught,
Mm.
all that it's said to be.
Right.
And from my perspective, I think the reason they're coming after our position so hard, and why, you have like top tier scholars supposedly bringing up our names in conversations. Listen, we're a 30-person church.
Right.
We're nobodies. We don't have degrees. We're not in the guild. Why are they coming after us? I think it's because they actually think that what we have to say is impacting people.
Right.
Either that or they have a lot of time on their hands, which I doubt. Like, it doesn't make any
Right.
sense. And so
Right.
what we're saying is actually resonating with people,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that people recognize the scriptures teach what we're saying.
Mm.
The scriptures do not teach what they're saying, what the
Right.
other side is saying.
No.
And so if you look past all the rhetoric, you look past all the appeals to authority, the attacks against our authorities, all this stuff, the mischaracterization of our position constantly, and you actually look at the kernel, the theological kernel of what we're saying the words in your Bible are the words that God breathed.
Yes.
That's what we're saying. And he preserved them for you, Christian,
Yeah.
because that's why he wrote it. He wrote it for you.
Mm.
So he could talk to you until the end of the age.
Yeah, amen.
That's why he gave you the Bible.
Right, amen.
And I think people recognize that is theologically accurate. It's scripturally accurate. And so, they come after us, I think, because there's a lot of voices coming out of the woodwork saying, hey, we've had enough.
Right.
We're not buying into this.
Right.
And so I think that's what's going on. Obviously I don't have any data to support that, but
Right.
just from the people we've talked to, it seems that's kind of what's going on.
I mean, I think you're 100% right. It jives with the reality of what we're seeing take place. That's for sure.
Right.
So
Right.
maybe speculative, but it seems to make sense. So
seems what's going on.
Right. And to transition into the next question, I think it's perfect what you just mentioned about the attacks on our authorities, the attacks on the King James translators, on the TR, and the guys who would go after the TR position, the confessional text position, canonical text position, add in whatever name somebody has coined this week or last year, and when they go after that, they always have to go to the King James Bible. They always go after the King James Bible. So I think it's interesting, and that brings us to our next question. Why do you think there is such hostility specifically towards the King James Bible amongst even people who call themselves Reformed men, like, say, Mark Ward, and we'll get into that next question. But specifically, why do you think the King James Bible is this focus of so much hostility? I mean, if it's a Bible that, by their own doctrine is inerrant, is at least, the text underneath, it's an inerrant text. It's got, it's inspired by God. It's the Bible. Unless they're saying it's not the Bible. So why do you think then there is such hostility towards the King James specifically?
It's hard to say. I think there's a couple of things going on. I think for the first side of everything, they don't like that most Christians read it. I think that really bothers them. Because this is this old relic that has no business still being around. Right. There's no reason, and it, to a certain sense, it speaks to the quality of their modern Bibles. The fact that there's 55% of Bible readers would rather read a 400-year-old book, a 400-year-old translation, than read what you have spent your life producing. Right. It's insulting. Yeah. And I think that's part of it. But then the other part of it, it's the only translation that people read that isn't touched by modernity. And I think that also is upsetting for people. Right. Because if you listen to the rhetoric and you listen to the people's opinions of themselves, they think that their Greek is superior to the King James translator's Greek. They think their scholarship is much better than those in the 17th and 16th and 17th centuries. And so, again, it's an insult to all the work they've done, saying, we know how to translate this stuff better. Why can't you see that? Why are you still picking up this pre-modern, ancient, dusty tome over what I have spent my whole life, what I've dedicated all of my time and energy and money into? Why can't you just recognize what I'm doing for you? And you have 55% of the church saying, yeah, we don't want anything to do with that. And so I think that's part of it. I think that's part of the reason why it is so upsetting for them.
Right. I mean, I think we could, speculate. I'm sure there's money financial gain
Sure.
reasons for publishers. I think there's
Yeah.
probably certainly other reasons we could speculate. But I
Well,
think
so before
yeah.
you go on to that, that's a big one. Even in Authorized in Ward's book, he says something to the effect of translators need to eat sandwiches too. So there is there
Yeah.
is a industrial, like sales kind of. That's a really big reason, actually. I think there's a lot of money in Bible sales. There's a ton of and study Bibles and Bible tools. I mean, there's tons of money into it, and you can't make money off the King James. So
No, no. Yeah, and so, obviously, I think that's, I mean, even James White has acknowledged that, there's no need
sure,
for new
yeah,
Bible translations. It's the only reason is money, et cetera, et cetera. So there's probably all sorts of other reasons, but I think,
right,
probably the main reason, maybe outside of money, is kind of what you touched on a minute ago, which is the postmodern idea and the Enlightenment based idea that we know more now. What does C.S.
right,
Lewis call it? It's chronological snobbery. That
sure,
we
yeah,
know more now than the King James Bible translators did. Why are you using that old thing that's not, up to date? It's not speaking to the people. We know more now, and we've gone ahead and fixed it. We need to distance ourselves from the past rather than see continuity from the past because we've updated it and made it better.
right. Well, and it disallows. This is really interesting. It disallows the modern Greek scholars to have an opinion to people that read a King James.
Mm,
So, for example, they say, given by inspiration, that's not accurate. It's actually God breathed, and we want you to use the terminology God breathed now.
mm,
There's all it's not it's being saved, right? They have all these little translational differences that they think is more accurate. It's accurate. It's not only begotten, it's one and only.
mm,
There's these certain things that they have no reach to the KJV reader. In
mm,
fact, the KJV reader is actually protected against that stream of thinking.
mm,
And so the academy has a hard time reaching the majority of Bible readers as a result. And
right.
I think it genuinely there's a certain part of this conversation where these really credentialed men are a little bit frustrated that they're not being received better. I think that
Right.
has to do with it. I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, I would agree, and I want to make a comment and hear what you think about that, which will be a perfect transition into the next question I have for you. So specifically with Reformed men having an
Hmm.
issue with the King James and attacking the King James, we can think
Sure.
of just right off the bat, Mark Ward, a Reformed Baptist, and James White, a Reformed Baptist. They say they're Reformed Baptists. So
Right.
we have two guys that are claiming Reformed title coming after the King James pretty relentlessly.
Yeah.
Now, just next to me, sitting next to me right here on this other wall of books, I have John Gill's commentary, Matthew Poole's commentary, and Matthew Henry's commentary, who
Hmm.
all use, as the text printed in there, the King James Bible. So I
Yeah.
have these stalwarts of Reformed faith, experiential Christianity,
Mm.
just those guys, not to mention all the other commentaries, that
Right.
comment and pick apart the King James Bible and explain it and
Mm.
expound it. But for the modern stuff, say the ESV. They have the
Mm.
ESV expository commentary series that came out, and you have
Mm.
scholars like D.A. Carson, Thomas
Right.
Schreiner, all these guys who are I'm not dissing their scholarship or anything, and they're Calvinist, so Schreiner and Carson, but
Right.
they are not Reformed men. So we have
Right.
Reformed men attacking the Bible that Reformed men have used and opting for the comments and the text and translation of men who are not Reformed. So why? I mean, briefly, it doesn't have to be long, but why do you think that is? Why Reformed men in specific?
Well, so I think it more has to do with exposure. So when you become reformed, right? When you enter in through the gate of young, restless, and reformed, who are you introduced to?
Mm,
You're introduced into John Piper, who has a whole sermon on the 8 points or 9 points or whatever why the pericope adultery is in Scripture.
mm,
You're introduced to John MacArthur, who
mm,
has the same kind of thought. You're introduced to R.C. Sproul. You're
mm,
introduced to all of the James White. You're
mm,
introduced to the probably Mark Ward for a lot of people. You're introduced to these really people that are very critical of the King James Bible.
mm,
Those are the gates that you enter through to Calvinism from or
mm,
through,
mm,
and so that's all you get, and
right.
all it takes is just an hour of lectures from these men
Mm,
and youth, and you're like, man, these guys I really trust. I've benefited greatly from their ministry. They're telling me that this is the scholarship is settled, and that's your perspective.
right.
And you know R.C. Sproul, for example, one of the greatest theologians, in the 20th century,
Right.
going into the 21st century, you don't want to disagree with him.
No,
You
no.
don't want to have a problem with
Right.
R.C. Sproul.
Right.
I think that has to do with, I think it has more so to do with exposure. And you look at like what James White says, where he kind of casts aspersion at some of the older scholars. I mean, he really doesn't talk very highly of pre-modern commentators, of pre-modern thought. He really is a big advocate of this idea that we know better. And pretty much every single person that you're going to enter the gate to Calvinism through kind of thinks this way.
Right.
And I think that's
right.
why. I think that's why.
I think that's really good. So on that very note, then our fourth question that I wanted to ask you is: you are writing a series of articles, review articles on Dr. Mark Ward's book, Authorized: The Use and Misuse of the King James Bible. I think, when did that come out? 2015, 16, something like that.
Right.
So it's been out for a while, but he started his YouTube channel and has like really artsy, cool hipster videos on his channel of kind of going through the book more in depth himself and going into all sorts of different things on it. So it seems to be getting kind of a second wind. Faith Life, which is Logos Bible Software, came out with a documentary that he did and things like that. So it seems to be gaining some ground. But you've actually begun writing a series of articles, going through chapter by chapter and just kind of picking apart what's going on and the argumentation, the rhetoric. Maybe we can make this a twofold question. Why are you writing a series of articles on Authorized? Why are you doing it? Just like we asked the question, why are they still addressing us? Why are you still addressing him? And secondly, do you think that's charitable to do it? Do you think it's okay to do it, to come after the scholar and write these things?
Sure, yeah. Why am I doing it? First of all, I view the what I've called the textual discussion as kind of a twofold thing. You have textual criticism, manuscripts, printed editions, underlying texts, that kind of thing. And then you have translation and translation methodology. And translation is how people access scripture. And so you kind of have on one side, you have the James Whites, the Peter Gurries, the Elijah Hicksons, and then Mark Ward's really one of the only people that are just going after the King James, which James White's also on that side too. He gets the discussion. He gets that it's twofold. And that's why he conflates the two constantly, because he thinks, hey, if I can get people disliking the King James, then they're going to dislike the TR. And it's a really good strategy. Yeah. But in terms of like what Mark Ward has done, the reason that I'm doing it is because I think the premise of his book is deceitful. And I say that as carefully as I possibly can. Not that Ward is necessarily deceitful. Just the premise of what he's saying isn't correct.
So he might not even realize that it's the rhetoric he's employing is deceitful rhetoric.
Sure. Yeah. Like, I don't want to attribute to him something that he's not actually doing. Right. But the words themselves and the arguments that he's making are completely not above board. And part of is it charitable? I don't necessarily think I would say probably 55% charitable.
So about as many people as read the King James Bible?
What's that?
As many people as read the King James Bible, the same percentage are charitable.
So why am I choosing to be a harsh critic of Mark Ward? Why am I choosing to be harsh rather than doing the handshake? And because I've gone down that road with all these guys before.
Even with Mark Ward.
Yeah, I've gone down this, and without giving too much information, he went and talked behind my back, messaging one of my acquaintances, talking about how I was too harsh. When in my first article, I did the scholarly handshake, I did the whole thing, and I just don't. This is one of my pet peeves, and I'm going to be measured here, but one of my pet peeves is sort of the scholarly dance, and all of these guys do it, right? Where they're so charitable and they're so nice and they're so funny, and they say things though that are really not great. A lot of the times we've had interactions with these guys where they they sort of play the nice guy, And then they come and they accuse you of all these sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
We at one point had one of these scholars accuse us of not being Christians. You know, they act nice and they play dirty.
Yeah.
And you know, we've tried to tell people this, and they don't believe us until they experience it, and they're like, "Wow, you guys are right. These guys can be nasty."
Right.
And I'm not saying all the scholars are nasty. That's
No.
not what I'm saying at all.
Right.
I'm saying when you actually get into the weeds of these guys, there's parts of them that come out that are not the way they present themselves to the general population.
Right.
And that's part of the reason why I'm not necessarily being all that charitable with Mark Ward, not because he slighted me or anything like that, but I think the rhetoric in his book is deceitful. You know, we've talked about for a long time how they will say one thing and then they'll say another thing which they actually believe underneath what's going on.
Right.
You know, so for example, in Mark Ward's book, he starts out by kind of saying, you know, I love the KJV, I can read the KJV, I grew up on the KJV. And you kind of see this evolution to him saying, I actually couldn't understand the KJV. I still can't read the KJV. You can't understand the KJV. You shouldn't read the KJV. It's like, how did you go from there to there? You know, how'd you go from that point to that point?
Right.
And I think the standard reader is not going to see that. I think that because I've heard people, when I'm critical of Mark Ward, people message me and they say, why are you so uncharitable to Mark Ward? Like, do you not see the rhetoric? The rhetoric it's not above board.
Right. So
you know
So you want to help people see how that's even taking place, because a lot of people don't know. Because I mean, even in the book, like as I've been reading your articles and I'm familiar with a lot of his stuff from his YouTube and things like that. He starts out building, he's very lighthearted. He's making some jokes. He's kind of revealing, I'm just a nerdy kook, kind of like you guys or whatever. But then as it progresses, I think there's even a quote in your most recent article from him where he talks about how when people tell him, we can understand the King James just fine, we don't have any trouble. He says, well, I don't, I want to believe you because I'm charitable, but I actually don't believe you because I'm a reader too and I can't understand it. So if I can't, you can't.
Oh, that's absolutely his game, and I just don't have a whole lot of patience for that.
Right. So you think that's not something, so coming off and just calling a spade and being like, that's not good rhetoric. That's not charitable. That's the opposite of charitable, and it's clothed in charitable language. You're saying, I'm going to call that for what it is. And that's not uncharitable. That's just calling it for what it is.
That's absolutely what I'm doing. I tend to be a little sharper when I write. That's just my style. I can be nice. I can dress my words up and make them soft, but I don't necessarily see the value in that. And I think that if you're going to issue a critique of somebody, issue the critique. Say. There's one thing that I can appreciate about James White is that he really takes the gloves off and just hits you really hard.
Right.
I can understand that. That makes sense to me. I grew up. I played lacrosse. I understand somebody squaring you up and hitting you. That makes sense to me. Like, I can understand. What I can't understand is somebody who clothes up their words really nicely to deliver a hard blow. Like, that doesn't make sense. But then, they basically put a hammer in a pillow and then cut out a little hole for the head of the hammer so no one sees them hitting you with a hammer. They see them hitting you with a pillow, but you actually just got hit with a hammer because they hid their rhetoric as the hammer. And the words are the pillow. So
And I know you okay, like we're friends, right? So, we've known each other for a little bit. Knowing you too, it's not that you're like, listen, this guy has been mean to me, so I'm just gonna be mean back. That's not the point you're making. You're bringing out the rhetoric that Mark Ward is doing because you can be hit all day. I can be hit all day with their rhetoric. But when the common person in the pew is being hit with it, that's something that you're like, I don't feel like I can tolerate that. So I'm just going to explain what's happening.
Right. And that's kind of my idea behind it. I want people to get into the way I think. And so a lot of my analysis is not necessarily debunking the book. It's more so pointing out the rhetoric and saying, see what he's doing here. This is what he's doing. And I think a lot of people miss rhetoric because uh, I don't know why this is, but I have a feeling
Mm-hmm.
there's a really big problem with uh, feminine Christianity,
Right.
right? Where what you're supposed to be as a Christian is soft and noodly and
Mm-hmm.
kind, but like not kind in a good way, like kind, nice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's,
Chipper.
you're yeah, you're supposed to be like this friendly sort of teddy bear.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because of that, like that's for the longest time has been what they've been teaching men to be.
Right.
They basically say, "Hey, you are to be as close to a woman as you possibly can."
Mm-hmm.
And so I think in a lot of ways people have kind of been taught to just be nice to especially scholars
Mm-hmm.
and say, this guy's a scholar. He's credentialed. This guy's well known. And it's like, I don't care, right? Like you can have all these degrees. I'm going to interact with your ideas and what you say.
Mm-hmm.
So if you say that you had trouble picking up girls in your book, I'm going to make fun of you for that
Right.
because I mean, it's entirely weird for the subject matter. So,
Right.
I think we need to get out of our heads that niceness is a fruit of the spirit. I don't think being nice is a fruit of the spirit. I think
Right.
being kind is a fruit of the, I think being gentle, but being bold and being courageous is also something we need to be as Christians and as
Right.
men especially. We need to be just as okay mopping the floor as we do beating someone over the head with the mop.
Right.
If someone comes into your house and tries to rob you, defend yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way I see Ward right now. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
finding this to be true as I read his book. His audience is clearly non-KJV readers. And he's trying to convince non-KJV readers that those crazy KJV readers need to put it down, put it in a museum, and make the switch or have their Bible updated. And he even reached out to TBS and said, "Hey, I'll help you update the thing." So I see him as coming into our house, getting himself involved in an issue he doesn't really have a vested interest in.
Mm-hmm.
And so, once I didn't go after Mark Ward until he started attacking, until he kind of started going after TBS and all
Mm-hmm.
that. Don't come into our house and tell us we need to change. We're fine with our KJV. Leave us alone.
Right.
And that's
Albert. Right. Yeah. I meant Albert Hemdy. He wrote that article against Albert Hemdy, the
yeah,
premier TBS Hebrew scholar. I mean,
yeah,
it's not okay. I mean, we're not sitting here being like, hey, I'll translate the passages in the TR that aren't there in the critical text and give them to you, so you need to put them in NIV. I want you guys to have the full Word of God. That's my position, and you guys need to put them in your NIV so that way everything's fixed. He's coming,
right.
we're not doing that. However, he's coming into our camp and saying, you guys cannot understand the KJV. It needs, no one can. Everyone's struggling with it, and I will come in and fix it up for you, and you can have the KJV that I helped you fix. And we're all saying, no thanks. And then he says, that's uncharitable, they're mean.
Right. I mean, that's exactly. It's like when it reminds me of the playground growing up. Like where you have kind of this smaller kid comes and picks on the big kid, and then the big kid punches him in the nose,
Right.
and then he cries and tells the teacher.
Right.
That's kind of what it reminds me of, where you come in and maybe he does have a good idea, maybe the KJV does need to be revised, and maybe this is an honorable Martin Luther-esque kind of moment in history for him, but I don't think that's the case. And when everyone that's reading the KJV is telling you, hey, we can read it, it seems to be you and your friends that had trouble with it. And that's okay. You're allowed to have trouble reading the KJV. There are times where I need to look stuff up, and no one is debating that doesn't happen.
Right. Right.
But we clearly want to read the KJV. We had the ESV, we had the NASB, we had the NIV, we had access. We still have access to all these Bibles.
Right.
If the KJV was so difficult, why wouldn't we just go back to our ESV? And like, so I see it. I see myself in this article series not being the aggressor at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when he says stupid things, I'm going to treat him like he said something stupid. And I don't think that's wrong.
No, I don't think so.
So people might disagree with me on that, but my intention is not to be a bully, but again, if you write something that is not well, that is not stated well, or it's a bad line of thinking, and it has to do with my passion project, which is addressing the text critical issue, I'm going to write about it. And I've addressed little blogs, I've addressed James White, I've addressed lots of people.
Right, and that's their whole thing is let's put it out in the marketplace of ideas, right? How many times does James White say that you can't go into the
Right.
marketplace of ideas and buy and sell the stock of intellect or whatever? So because you're a TR guy, you're a King James guy. So if they're putting this out, there's why can't we respond? And if we are so non-essential anyway, we don't know what we're talking about. Why is it that we're not allowed to respond? Why would it matter if we respond or not? Well, I think it goes back to, again, the conversation we had earlier, that this is making a difference. And we see it as important to respond to these things. I've even made a video because I think it's undercutting people's confidence in the Bible because they're not giving us anything to replace it. I think he finally got to a couple points in his book that you're going to address where he says, the KJV needs to go away, and what will replace it? I don't know, maybe the NIV. That's horrible.
Yeah,
that's not a good thing. I mean, I think every Reformed person would probably be like, yeah, let's not have the NIV replace this. Let's at least do something else.
Well, and that's also a good point, and why I believe the gloves need to come off on our side a little bit. I think we don't need to do the scholarly dance.
Yeah.
We don't need to play by the rules of the guild. This is kind of interesting, and there's a concept called game theory where you kind of there's kind of two sorts of people. There's people that play by the rules, that are bound by the rules, and people that are not bound by the rules. And the person not bound by the rules is going to be more successful than the person bound by the rules in the game, in the encounter. We don't have to play by their rules. We don't have to publish to journals. We don't have to do the scholarly handshake and be nice and do all the the introductions and all this stuff that they do.
Right.
We play by our own rules because our jobs are not at stake, right? We're not going to get fired from our seminary for holding this position.
Right.
We're not going to get slapped on the wrist by our publisher. We get to play by a different set of rules. And I'm not saying we get to be mean or anything like that, but we don't have to access this topic by publishing in Bart Ehrman's book series, right? Like that's not our entry point,
right?
And so it doesn't seem like they really have caught on to that we don't have to play by their rules in terms of how we write. We don't have to cite. We don't have to be perfectly formatted in our articles. We can misspell things. People get mad at me all the time for having spelling and grammar errors. It's like, do you know how much words I write every day? Yeah, I think that in terms of what this is, what we're doing, this movement, as Pastor Riddle has said, I don't see a problem playing with guerrilla warfare because they do too. They lie about Erasmus all the time. They revise history. They say things that didn't happen the way they say it, and so it's not that we're gonna lie. We're not gonna play dirty, but we're also not going to play by their rules.
Right. I mean, we've seen, I've seen interviews with, Dr. Gurry and Dr. Riddle talking, and, we've also seen this other places. I think we've even encountered it too, where they bring up the confession of faith, kept pure in all ages. They then tell us what it means. Kept pure in all ages means that there was always a perfect manuscript at all times. We say, no, it doesn't. And that every Christian had access to a perfect text at all times. And we're like, that's literally not what it means. Here, read Howard Milnes. Read Milnes, read Hills, read all these people. That's not what that meant. Read the confession, the authors of the confession themselves, read commentaries. That's not what kept pure in all ages mean. And they say, but it does. So it's almost passive aggressive. And, how do you even deal with that? Well, we can't, go and get, $700 Brill books to then refute them. So they're not going to hear us anyway. So no matter what you do, you're not going to be heard. I mean, Dr. Riddle is a professor and publishes in peer-reviewed journals constantly, and he doesn't get to have a say. If you have a PhD, you publish in theological journals on text criticism, and you still don't get a hearing, I mean, what does it matter then?
Well, and they literally told Dr. Riddle, well, you're not in the guild, so it doesn't matter that, and so this is the game they're playing. The rules that they are playing by is, I'm in the field, you're not, therefore what I say about textual criticism is undisputable. And so what I do then is post an article making fun of them for doing that. right? Because that's how you break through to the common person. And I try to include enough source material in my articles for people to go and like actually look, what did Beza say? What did Erasmus say? What are these people? What does Dan Wallace say? What are these guys saying?
Right.
And if you play by their rules, if I was playing by their rules, I'd have to go get a PhD. I'd have to go start publishing, to Bart Ehrman's journal, and that's how I would get my voice heard.
Right.
And I get the feeling, and I can't speak for them, but I get the feeling that this is really frustrating for them. That I'm getting sometimes 1,500 views on my blog a week.
Right.
And that's a very niche topic.
Right.
And I think it's because, to a certain extent, I have chosen to be a little provocative. And I think that's the way that you get. I think that's probably why they feel, back to the first question, why they still feel the need to address us, because we don't play by the rules, and that makes them upset that we have such a. It's a small audience, but it's an audience,
right?
It's gotta be frustrating,
right? And the reformers also did not play by the rules of the papacy, right? You know what I mean? I'm not saying we're the reformers. I'm not saying that, of course not.
No,
or that they're the papacy necessarily. Although I think many of the
there's some pretty good parallels.
Right? No, there definitely is. One thing before we've kind of already touched on that last question, but one thing before we make some closing remarks is. And you and I have talked extensively about this, is there seems to be a large disconnect. So if you could comment on this, there seems to be a large disconnect between the quote-unquote evangelical scholars doing text criticism, whatever that means, and the person in the pew on their side. They have no idea how to reach the person on the pew, so it seems like people like Dr. Ward have to reach down on this level, and it seems almost passive-aggressive. It seems the rhetoric is offensive, in my opinion, and same for you. And so... there seems to be a massive disconnect. When we've had conversations, okay, we'll use the Tyndale House Greek New Testament, use the SBL. And I'm like, why? Why would I use that one when no one uses it? What translations are made from it? Well, why does that matter if there's translations of it made or not? I'm like, because the person in the pew, your average Christian, is reading the NA28 translated. They read the NA28. They don't read the Tyndale House. So why would I use the Tyndale House or go after the Tyndale House? So there seems to be a large disconnect. So if you want to make a couple comments on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of one of the weird observations that we've had.
Yeah,
where we've asked just very plain questions like, how does this translate to the people? How does that make sense? You have, for example, Dr. Gurry writing about how Christians are going to have access to the CBGM and that going to be encouraged to use it on a personal level, and you have people like James White, who will say, everyone doesn't need to learn Greek and Hebrew, but it's a good way to spend your time. You have, and then you go and kind of look at other scholars kind of saying the same stuff. And it seems that the direction of this is going towards the average person sitting in a pew is going to need to know how to use computer tools to read their Bible. They're going to need to learn a little Greek and Hebrew. And I mean, it's so disconnected,
right?
And this idea that there's no perfect translation or perfectly accurate translation, good grief, give me a break,
right?
Like that's saying to the average person, I know Greek and Hebrew, and by the way, they probably don't know it as well as they say they do, but I know Greek and Hebrew. And I get to read the Bible. And if you want to read the Bible the way I read my Bible, you have to learn a lot of text criticism, Greek and Hebrew, some Aramaic. And if you really want to understand some of the nuances, you got to learn Latin and maybe some Syriac and Chaldean. And it's like, come on, that's how you can't get any more disconnected than that.
Right. And how is Karen going to read her Bible?
Right. You wonder why the Bible readership numbers are just so, there's a reason, and this is kind of interesting. There's a reason that when you look at the Bible reading statistics, you always have to nuance it with of the people that read their Bible. Right. That's why the whole thing, there's a billion, 500 billion people bought the NIV in 2018 or what, The problem is, of the people that actually read their Bibles, they're not reading the NIV.
No.
And so the people that actually read their Bibles, most of them read the King James,
Right.
and I think that that's a huge disconnect for them.
Right.
What we have seen is that a lot of these men, a lot of them really great stand-up Christian men,
Mm-hmm.
are so, and I think probably because a lot of them are younger. When you're young, you get so focused. Like, I know this,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know this. You
Yeah.
get so focused on your work that you forget to look up out of your cave.
Mm-hmm.
And what's outside of this new evangelical text critical cave is a bunch of people that have no idea what you're saying.
Right.
And what I imagine is, as you start to popularize this idea, the
I.e.
theology,
i.e. Dr. Ward.
yeah, people are going to start getting pretty upset. I think people are not going to like it all that much.
Mm-hmm.
And which is why I think mostly Ward's our audience are people that don't read the KJV. I think that's probably, or used to read the KJV, grew up IFB, got burnt. I think that a lot of these ex KJV readers are probably people that got burnt by the IFB, not burnt by the KJV.
No, I agree 100%.
I think that's a lot of what's going on. And because KJV onlyism is intimately connected with IFB,
Mm-hmm.
they have to shirk and shrug all of that doctrine and give a reason for why they've now changed their Bible. I think that's a part to do with it.
Right.
So,
and I wrote a little article. What was it, last year? I wrote a little article on, is the Texas Receptus really a minority position? Where I brought up the same statistic that you brought up the other day. 55% of people read a King James Bible. Of those who read their Bible, 50 or 55% of those people read the King James Bible. Another 11% read the New King James. There's got to be at least 400 people that read the MEV. So add that in there. So we're talking upwards of almost 70% of Bible readers read something from the TR, the translation of the TR. So like you said, I mean, the majority of people are reading a TR translation anyway, and that's the people that actually read their Bible, the people that actually care and are reading it. So, maybe those statistics have changed since, mid 2019, but either way, there's a big disconnect here between what they're saying and doing and what the person in the pew, Karen and Barbara and Joe Plummer, they're supposed to, can you see them sitting there with the Etizia Critica Major, like 12 volumes, like, piecing through this, NRK Ein Ha Logos, like they're sitting there doing that, like
Kai Ha Logos.
Yeah, I don't think that's happening.
Yeah, so one last thing on my approach, and people might not like this. They might say that's not befitting for a Christian or whatever. Go and read some Martin Luther. But I think that one of the biggest problems I have with what's going on right now is there doesn't seem to be any good reason to attack the King James. So from a doctrinal perspective, you have guys like James White saying from the most two extreme manuscripts, there's no doctrine affected. Well, okay, so if we're taking the Alexandrian text as the most extreme text and the TR as the most stable text, there's no difference between them. Then what problem do you have with it? On the other hand, you have Mark Ward who quote unquote genuinely wants to help people. Okay, go ahead, do your false friend ministry to help people. That would make sense to me. If you started a website that said, have trouble reading the King James, here's a tool for you. If that's what he did, then I would not be addressing Mark Ward at all.
Right.
I would not have anything bad to say. I'd say, thank you. I know you read an ESV or whatever, but thank you for this. This is a great help to the church, to the people that have trouble reading their Bible. Thank you.
Right.
And instead, he's decided to say, look at these tools I'm using to help the church. Meanwhile, while also saying this thing needs to be relegated to a museum. And so that's why I have a problem with it.
Right.
That's why the gloves are off on my end. And they're not really all that off. I'm not hitting them that hard.
Right.
But I mean, people need to see the how rhetoric plays into all this and how half-truths and full lies get thrown into the discussion and people become consumed by Erasmus and these kind of red herrings in the discussion, and they don't see what's actually going on, which is that you have people that don't believe the original can be found are making your Bible. And that's not okay. That's not good.
And on that, Dr. Gurry did say like that is completely inaccurate what you just said. The field has nothing to do with that, what you just said. And Dr. Riddle, Pastor Riddle has been going back and forth with him on that. So if people are interested on hearing more about, is the Academy really saying you can't find the original? Is no one really looking for it? Go see the interactions between them and the newest, the three newest Word magazines. So I think 162, 163, and 64. That will address all of that. All right, in closing, a couple closing comments. We could do this by asking this question to you. So, in light of everything you just said, and this is the direction you're taking with Mark Ward's book and Mark Ward, so don't take that as a framework for everything we should do moving forward. But what is the future of text? This discussion of text between TR guys and the other side. Where do we go from here? Where do you think it needs to go, and how can these two opposing sides make any ground?
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably we need to get these evangelical textual scholars to admit that what they're saying is different than what the Reformation scholars are saying.
Okay.
I've written a couple of articles on this. No, Beza was not doing modern textual criticism. That's a good article to reference. I think that they need to have a heart check. They need to come to the realization that there's a lot of ways where they really bend history, and so I think that's an important thing that needs to happen. I think there needs to be some agreement and say, because you have had guys like James White who will say, those guys were wrong, and there's a lot of people that will say those guys were wrong, and I think that's good.
Yeah, I can handle that. Yeah,
because then we can have a discussion, and we can actually come to the middle and say, okay, well then which one's better? But right now what you have, and this is why I see the need to be a little bit harder on them. What I see is going on is that they're trying to wash history. They're trying to wash what actually happened by using guys like Jan Kranz. White does this all. So on one hand, White will say they were wrong, Turretin was wrong, and then on the other hand, we'll say Turretin didn't mean what you say he's saying. And
right.
There's make up your mind, stick to something, and then actually defend it. But don't say these conflicting things at the same time. So I think that's the first step. I think either the actual evangelical scholars need to come to terms that they are not the grandchildren of the Reformation. These modern Bibles are not the grandchildren of Tyndale and the King James. They're just simply not. When it's either they've got to realize that, or the church is going to realize that. And I think that we're seeing more and more the church is kind of seeing that. And so you can, from their perspective, you can either double down and continue attacking the King James, undermining people's faith in the Bible, or you can just say, hey, we're wrong on this. We think that our direction is better, and this is why. So what that would look like, they need to produce a new Chicago statement. That's the only way that this happens. The only way that this conversation moves forward is if they stop playing politics and actually answer the doctrinal question. Right now they're playing politics. They're saying, but Erasmus, but Beza, but Stephanus, but the KJV translators, and so on and so forth. TR onlyism is cultic. KJV onlyism is irrational. And they use all of these games, these rhetorical devices where they move the definition of King James only and then attack it. Things like this. They got to stop doing that and answer our doctrinal question, which says, how do you defend inerrancy and attack the King James?
Right.
Really big questions like that. But I don't think quasi-preservation is going to be their ticket. I think they've got to figure out a better answer than that. Because right now, the Chicago Statement on a Biblical Inerrancy is a completely useless doctrinal statement. At the time of recording this, it means nothing. It 100% is not a legitimate doctrinal statement because they have chosen as their form of validation textual criticism.
Right.
And textual criticism has changed so much that the Chicago Statement is completely worthless. And so I think going forward, from our side, I would like to see them actually square up and say, either be consistent and say, yes, we disagree with them. We think they were wrong. And then say, this is our doctrinal statement. This is what we believe the Bible is. And kind of the way they're going with that right now is that the Holy Spirit gave to us what was good enough for him.
Right.
That's not a doctrinal statement.
Right.
That's not how this works.
No.
That's not a coherent system. And so I think that's the direction. I think they have to really square up with their doctrine and figure that out.
Right.
Instead of just attacking people that read the King James and people that are confessional text or King James only in the IFB. I don't think that's going to work for them long term, actually.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
100% I agree. I think that they haven't really heard us, and they're not trying to hear us, because even Dr. Riddle's saying, hey, here's my critique. The text criticism you guys are doing is not the same as either the reformers or even the text critical scholars of the 1900s. It's completely different. And they say, no, you don't get to say that. You're not in the guild. No, you're wrong. And then they also say, here's what your confession of faith means. Those kinds of things. So I think you're 100% right on that. Though there needs to be new lines drawn in the ground. There needs to be new definitions made for these things, and they have to restate what they mean then. Because you guys keep changing what you mean. So what do you mean?
Well, and that's because they don't have a really solidified doctrinal statement.
Right.
This is something that really frustrated me with Dr. Gurry. Was that he says, well, the scholars are trying to find the original. But then you ask him, well, how do you define original? And he squirms. And so it ends up being something like the Osgong text.
Yes.
So I just simply don't think that this conversation is going to be helpful at all, while they think that the way to win this is to attack our person and attack the people that created the TR.
Right.
I don't think that's going to gain any ground.
Right.
And I think I hope this happens. I hope people see that ultimately. Well, here's what's likely going to happen. It doesn't seem like they're slowing down in their direction towards higher criticism. That doesn't seem like they're not pumping the brakes on that. No. My guess is we're going to see and this is just a guess. I'm not prophesying. This is just a guess.
Right.
I think we're going to probably start to see the evangelical text critics go the way of the Gospel Coalition and the PCA. I think that we'll probably, and we already are seeing that. Right. Hickson posted on the Gospel Coalition and it was just the most weird article, I think, on the ending of Mark. So they're utilizing the platforms that are going really left right now.
Right.
And it just wouldn't surprise me if they kept going that direction. And I'm not saying that to disparage them, but it just seems the platforms that they're using are becoming increasingly less reformed.
Right. I agree. Yeah.
Awesome. Hard to say that with certainty, but
yeah,
seems like
I would agree. All right, cool. Well, I mean, I hope that was helpful to you guys. That was a fun conversation. Either way, we could, in the words of Ward, we could nerd out all day talking about all this stuff. So we love it. So hopefully, guys, that was helpful. Thank you, Taylor, for coming on and talking with me. Glad we could record it. Hopefully, it works out. So awesome, guys. God bless you. May the Lord keep you.